What job should growth get done in a company?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's not an easy question, I think. The way I'm thinking about it is growth team's job is try to identify what's the bottleneck to revenue, right? Making more money for the company. Could be ARR, could be bookings, depending on the type of company. What is the bottleneck from a go-to-market perspective? Is the bottleneck that nobody knows about the company? Is the bottleneck you don't have leads, so you have a lot of people knowing about your company, but you don't have hand raisers? Is the bottleneck that you're not able to convert these hand raisers into actual opportunities to sell, or is the bottleneck you cannot close those deals, right? And where I draw the distinction between marketing and growth is the growth team really needs to be not opinionated about any of those four things. Whenever you find where the hole is, you have to go big to try to solve it. Once you solve it, probably the bottleneck will move to another one of the four areas, and then you move on, right? So, for example, here in my current job, clearly the demand is not an issue, right? Like awareness is extremely high. We have far more inbounds that we can process. So I've been spending most of my time on the conversion side. How do we create new processes to convert as many of those inbounds into revenue without being blocked by the lack of sales? We don't have enough sales reps, basically. Whenever this is going to be done, we're going to move into the capturing more demand. How do we convert more? And then maybe in the future we're going to have to do more brand spend to generate more like awareness of so.
That's Davide. He's the head of growth at Clay. Clay is a go-to-market platform that unifies first-party, intent, and third-party data so growth teams can research accounts faster and run highly targeted outbound. Davide started investment banking before switching to growth, where he spent 4 years at Verkada before joining Clay. In this episode, we talk about why growth's job is to remove the bottlenecks to growth, the skills that make someone successful in a growth role, and why your job doesn't have to suck. I hope you enjoyed the episode, but before we get back to it, run the intro. Welcome to On Growth, a new series from On Marketing to help you think more strategically about growth, marketing, and life. I won't tell you what to think, I'll help you improve how you think. I'm Jordan Ogren, a marketing strategist with 9 years of experience and a podcast host for the last 4. This episode was recorded on December 2nd, 2025. All views shared are the individual views of the host and guests, not those of their employers or associate organizations. This show is for informational purposes, not professional advice. Thank you for being here. That makes sense. So almost removing the bottleneck, which then in my mind is to accelerate the growth, to increase the growth in that area. How do you, because I'm going in my mind of like low hanging fruit, high hanging fruit, like how do you know which bottleneck is not the right one to pull, but maybe, I guess, do you think of bottlenecks in any sort of domino way of like, if we can do one, that then it makes the next one easier? Or do you really just have this kind of clear land set of like, we're going to attack this bottleneck, but we don't really understand how it maybe plays in the system, which then that one affects this? How do you think through like which bottleneck to attack?
I try to have metrics that I'm looking at for each one of the steps, right? So for the demand gen side, you probably look at how, what's the awareness level? Do people know about your company at all? How many website visits you have? This is more of the vibes marketing, if you want, which is extremely important because that's a funnel that you can capture, right? When you actually do lead gen, which is what most growth teams do, it's actually lead capture. It's not lead generation, And so you probably try to get the 5% that is ready to buy and is aware of your company and try to get them to leave the information. And so you can see, right, if the bottleneck is demand generation, meaning like nobody knows about your company, you're going to see it because cost per lead is going to be insanely high. It's going to cost so much money to attract these people because they don't know about it, right? Instead, like at Clay, we have a lot of inbounds. And so you can see that the conversion rates through the funnel starts to drop very dramatically. We book less meeting than we should, despite that the prospect, is the right fit for us. That probably points to the fact we don't have an SDR team that can process the lead, or we don't have a sales rep that can follow them through. So you have metrics for each one of those steps, and you see what metric If you were to double that metric, how hard would it be? And what would be the impact on your growth?
That makes sense. The metrics can be a great telltale signal to point towards, like if we're getting that inbound, then the awareness step. That makes a lot of sense. How do you see then like the growth function? I don't want to say where it sits, but does it hover above all these? Because you went through bottlenecks, and many of the bottlenecks were kind of all over. Some were marketing, some were sales, some were maybe even customer success of like people not engaging with the product enough once they're in. Like, how do you think about where growth sits? Is that hovering above? Is it underneath? Does that not matter? Is it just going all over all of those four dimensions as you talked about? Where do you see the growth function person living, staying, operating, or does that not matter? Is that just a silly question?
I don't think it matters if the company is not dysfunctional, right? Dysfunctional, I mean that if it's a company where people are understanding like data and say, oh, you bring a right point and you show me the data for it, so let's work together to solve it. In most companies, it's inside marketing, although a lot of what we do is involving like sales and RevOps, right? You were mentioning earlier about outbound. That's something a growth team typically works on, which is arguably borderline SDR ops area, no? And similarly for on the product side, Clay also has growth product team, which work very closely with, especially for the onboarding side of things. Because how can I have a goal for revenue, net new acquisition of customers without owning the first 3 hours that people are using Clay? It's impossible, right? Because I could do an amazing job, but I could still fail. So it's to answer your question, like it doesn't really matter. In my mind, it should be a separate function, but it can be anywhere as long as people are actually willing to collaborate and get people's inputs and help.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you feel like the growth function, the person in that growth role, benefits from a more generalist approach or a more specialist approach? Because it seems like you're going in and out of maybe emails that chain. Like it seems like the generalist, I'm making the hypothesis that someone who's able to see the big picture, the generalist thinker is better at that versus someone who has a specialist in one of the realms. What are your thoughts on this generalist specialist, or like what makes a good growth marketer? That's the question maybe I'm trying to ask. How do you think through that?
It's a good question, right? And in the past 5 years that I've been in this kind of in this kind of area, I pivoted a couple of times. So I started by hiring super generalists. It's kind of like me. I started growth from investment banking. Has nothing to do with growth if you think about it, just because of the soft skills that might be like transferable. And then we started looking for more and more specialization. We want someone that is good at paid ads. But I went too far, I think. The issue with that is to be very good at growth, you need to have end-to-end ownership. And the way I define end-to-end ownership is that you don't take, you're not assigned tasks, you're assigned problems, you know? And problems could be, oh, yes, you need to run a campaign on LinkedIn. That, you know, the task is I need to create the ad and I need to create the audience and I need to launch the campaign. Those are tasks. But the problem goes beyond, which is, okay, do we need new pieces of content that we don't have? And we have to work with the content team to create a new white paper or new webinar or something that we can promote. The problem is, are the leads that are getting in, this is a plug for Clay, are they getting enriched properly, right? Or are we getting data without phone numbers, you know, with the wrong phone number? And then we assign those to sales and sales cannot do anything about it because they don't have the data. That's owning the problem. And so the answer is probably a generalist that can get obsessed about specific things and become as good as like a specialist. I don't love specialists because they're usually very narrow. And as soon as you have to pivot to something else, like they struggle a lot, you know?
Yeah, no, I like that you talk about the projects or problems versus tasks. And I think in another podcast episode, you talked about like you want to find someone who's in the shower thinking about how to fix. And that example is deliverability. So it's like this thought of like you're always thinking about the problem, but you're having so many different areas of inputs of ways to solve said problem or trying to make progress on it. That makes a lot of sense. And maybe a problem solver or someone who is inherently curious and like really wants to solve, like they could fit well in it because you need to pull from so many different areas to solve problems. Usually, at least in my own opinion of like world solving problems is not usually domain specific. You pull something from another domain or you use history
Correct.
to move forward.
Correct. So the main transferable skills that makes people from various backgrounds, I literally hire from every background aside from marketing, actually. And it's just problem solving, right? You get a problem thrown at you and you can break it down and try to think about a solution and a way to test your potential solution in a way that makes sense and gives you confidence that what's happening at the end, it's the right outcome, you know?
What is something in your work? I know you kind of already alluded to this investment banking, starting there and then kind of coming into this growth area. What is something from your time starting in growth to today that you've changed your mind on how to do growth, how to think about growth, or maybe even something you used to do that you just don't do anymore because you found it not as valuable or not as helpful?
Yeah, so probably because it's a good question. Probably because I came from investment banking. You know, I was really obsessed about what I could see and what I could touch. And I would completely discount everything that was more vibes, quote unquote, you know. And that was probably true for my first years, 2 years, I think. I was really like, if anything is not showing me a metric, then it has to be a bad idea. And the metric had to be the metric that was my specific goal, right? So it wasn't even a leading indicator. Over time, and especially since I came at Clay, which has actually thrived as a company thanks to the vibes, merge with the growth, right? We what's amazing about this company is we have vibes and growth that are two separate teams working together, complementing each other. And so now I find myself spending a lot of time thinking about what's a piece of content that would really work and people would care about and we want to listen to. And as a collateral damage, we might have some people buying Clay, but that's besides the point. Because I understand that being thought of as a company that is leading the industry and is giving value added for free to your customers, that's a good thing. And it's very hard to quantify. It's impossible to quantify, in fact, but it's going to pay off over time. So this mindset shift, especially as a former like finance person, very data obsessed, took a bit of time. And now everything I do, I look at metrics and I'm obsessing about those, but I try to see the bigger picture of what's common sense more than just what's lifting the metric by 2%.
So kind of merging that data approach with the vibes, like realizing that there's some validity to the vibes rather than only things you can quantitably measure. Yeah, that makes sense.
You need to embrace the vibes. It's crazy hearing me say this. I think my past colleagues would laugh at this, but like I think you need to embrace it. And whenever you do vibey things, you still have to have a very clear objective of what you're trying to achieve. You know, maybe it's not direct attributable revenue. So I still want to have a clear objective of what we're trying to achieve, but you need to embrace the fact that there's no perfect knowledge of what you're doing.
No, I like that you touch on that you can do vibes very poorly, or you can just trying to do vibes isn't it? You have to have the intention and trying to see it in the bigger system of growth and vibes, not just vibes. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I think vibe is kind of a trendy word with the vibe coder, vibe marketer, all of the vibe thinging. But I do totally align with you, and it makes that sale maybe easier, or it helps when you're known, as you kind of touched on. So that makes a lot of sense.
What we call vibes today is effectively what was the standard of marketing, like probably 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But then because of automation, right, the cool growth hackers, that was a cool word like 10 years ago, they were just doing like paid advertisement. They were sending cold emails, they were doing all this like very highly scalable and automated campaigns. So what we call vibes today, it's actually, if we host a dinner and we talk about things that are unrelated to Clay but add value to the humans that are in front of you, the humans might like you more than if you just send them a cold email. So that's kind of the vibe that I'm talking about.
I love it. I love it. And I do think your plug of checking out Clay for their product, but even their content, I think you guys have, as you touched on, have nailed it. I think there was this funny video with one of your co-founders talking about going to the Super Bowl, and it was like super interesting to see the finance and the kind of the creative visionary person, like talk through like how would this be using numbers but also leaning into some of the vibes. But I think eventually got to the point that it wouldn't make any ROI sense. But there is that like thought of like trying to, so I think you guys have done a well job of creating the vibes or creating that. So I think if someone listening to this is like, damn it, I wish they like gave me the playbook. I don't think there is a perfect playbook, but just go check out Clay, because I think they're doing it well in all sorts of their content, events, everything, as you touched on. I think you guys are creating vibes. So well done.
Yeah, and even those vibey videos you just described, like there was a proper decision making. We want to do this type of series where we have executives talking about real life problems that people relate to. And we are also tracking engagements. So we're trying to actually make numbers make sense out of this video. We're not just doing it for the sake of it. Like there's a lot of work going behind those videos that are vibey. And sure. But I do think we're investing a lot on those type of things, because as a former customer of Clay, I was one of the first customers. I care about this type of content. I don't care about like the sales pitch and presentations. And so I'm assuming others would relate to this.
It's always easier when you were a user of the product to start to think through those lenses of what they care about. And I love that. All right. If you're ready, I think I'm ready to switch over to the life part of this conversation.
Sounds good.
All right. So just for you, because I know everybody lives with their own definition of life, but what is the purpose? What is the job of life? What are you hiring life to do for you? What progress are you hoping to gain out of life?
I'm a very like ambitious person. And so what I try to do, like what keeps me excited in life, is try to do stuff that kind of pushes the limits. And this could be like moving to the UK and then moving to the US, or it could be like completely pivoting career like a couple of times, or it could be like whatever, getting a dog or deciding like to getting married in different continents. Like I try to keep, maybe I have a bit of ADHD according to some of my colleagues, but like I try to do things that are keeping me like challenged.
So would you say then at the end, a well-lived life is a life that you have been continually challenged, doing new things, stepping into the unknown? Is that how on your deathbed you'll kind of say, hey, this was a life well-lived? Or what defines for you at the end a life well-lived?
My hope is like you don't get any regrets. You have build something that can be a family, can be a business, or whatever like is important. For me, both are important actually. And but you don't have big regrets of something. Oh, I wish I did it, but I was lazy and comfortable and I didn't end up doing it.
So kind of a minimization of regret is something that is leading your life, that you're aiming to minimize as much as you can the regrets that could happen or could be at the end.
Yeah. And obviously it's a trade-off, because it's like, obviously it's not great to be so far away from the family and where you grew up and your friends. But at the same time, it's a good life experience. And I think it would be a regret if I said no to this opportunity to move to Silicon Valley and be here.
When, for you, was there a point in your life, I'm going to assume that you've always been this way based off your ADHD comment, but like, have you had a point where you kind of were like, I'm going to lean into yeses more, I'm going to lean into doing those things? Or was it always a disposition ever since a young child that you were just willing to change schools, do things that like other kids would be far more afraid of doing? Like you just leaned into that? Or is it something you've built over time?
I definitely built over time. I think probably like after my 20s, partially because of my parents actually pushed me to, you should leave Italy and go explore outside. And when you start doing it once, like you remove the mental barrier of like, should I do it? Should I care or not? And then it's much easier to do it the second time, the third time. And the same is for changing a job, or like, deciding to commit to a partner, or like, for me, even like getting the dog was a big step. But then I would do it again, like next week if I had to.
Yeah. Do you have any mental models for, I'm just going to like the 1-door, 2-door decisions that I've read from Jeff Bezos of like the 1-door decisions are things that are hard to go back on. So having a child would be an example of like, yeah, I'm not sure if you just like do that sporadically or you say yes to that without much thought, because you can't you can't really truly go back on that. Like, do you think about that at all? Of like, this is a 1-way door, this is a 2-way door, where there's a lot of 2-way doors in life of like moving, I'll just move back crack, like it's not that hard, but there are some one-way doors? Or do you envision everything as a two-way door because of the mindset of lean into the unknown and nothing is like forever, quote unquote?
No, I think there are some things that are there are some things that are pretty big decisions. And to be clear, I take a long time to make those decisions. It's not like I make spur of the moment things. Like it takes a really long time to make these decisions, but like I'm actively looking for this situation where you have decisions to make. Does it make sense? It does.
Yeah.
Like even to buy some pair of shoes, it can take months for me to do it. But like some people are not even looking for the opportunity.
Sure, that makes sense. So you still do quote unquote due diligence to some
Yeah,
extent. You're
yeah,
not
yeah.
just like, I'm moving
100%.
to San
No, no, no.
Francisco or whatever. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. And I wouldn't pose you as that, but I think there's this thought of like, say yes, take exploration, kind of becomes this thought of sporadic, which then is like you're really just taking opportunities as they come. And sometimes I see a lot of my friends or people, they're running from things. So they just keep taking opportunities to move different places. And it's like, man, you can never move from yourself, the central person that you're trying to run away from, quote unquote. But I think it's a huge thing because so many people have regrets of the things they didn't do versus the things that they do. And I've read that in so many books of like more regrets for not doing, which then would lead that by saying yes to things as you're doing, you're going to hopefully have more or less regrets at the end.
Yeah, definitely. Like I try to minimize the kind of impulsive decisions, and I think my dad made a lot of sacrifice, like so that I could go to university and all this good stuff, and so I just don't want to do like crazy stuff that doesn't make any sense. So I do things
Yeah.
that are considered like typical from where I'm coming from, but like I try to keep some sort of like logic to it. I hope, you know.
Yeah, you want to be a good steward of the work that your parents did for you. That makes a lot of sense. What is a lesson or something? It seems like a lot of the things from your parents you've quote unquote embedded into your life, but what is a lesson or a thing you've learned from them that you still apply today that comes into your mind frequently that you're like, oh, I'm very glad that either by model or by teaching, I was gifted this by my parents?
The fact that you have to earn things and that there's the way I think about my parents is that they don't have any sense of entitlement. And this, regardless of like your status in the family or at work, like you have to work harder than everyone else every day and be obsessed about it and be kind of like humble about it. That's something that I try to always have.
Well, I think from this short conversation and from the podcast I listen, I think you're definitely nailing that. And I think they've done a positive job of distilling that or modeling it for you that it actually stuck. Because I think parents, elders, mentors, they have a lot of good stuff, but it's not always enough for us to latch onto it or to apply it to our life.
Oh, yeah.
So a final question, and one of my favorite questions I like to ask, it's around the movie Inception, which is a story where they go into people's minds and they incept most times not great ideas. You're going to sell your company, you're going to give me X date, so then the next day that person wakes up and that dream that was incepted, they think it's their own. We're going to go a little bit more on the happy side, benevolent. What if you could incept an idea in every human's mind? So outside of growth, outside of business, maybe business, but maybe not. What would you incept that tomorrow every human wakes up? What you incepted, we live out of as our own dream, as our own thought process. What idea do you incept in the minds of every human on this planet?
I think probably the idea, it seems like most people have the preconception that you have to hate your job. Everyone hates their job, it's normal and it's acceptable. And I don't think that makes sense, meaning that there's certainly a lot of things that everyone hates about their own jobs, but there's also a lot of things that they like about it and the reason they chose about it. They chose that particular job and try to see the positive things. There's a lot of things that I hate about my job, to be clear, right? But there's these two, three things, like the reason that make me think about it in the shower, that you get obsessed about it. You need to find something that you get obsessed about. And if your job is something that doesn't make you obsessed, then it's probably the wrong job. You should try to change. That's what I did at some point from pivoting from finance. I was lacking this kind of like, man, I want to think about it when I'm at home. And instead of complaining, I said, I'm going to get a 70% haircut to my salary and try again and see if it works better. And it definitely did, and I'm happy about it. But this acceptance that everyone's jobs suck, and so you just have to deal with it. I don't agree.
I love it. I also don't agree. I think it's a very complex and challenging thought of like employment, and that there's probably some jobs that are just quote unquote shit jobs. But I think your point's so valid of like, if we all had this idea of like, I can enjoy my job. Like, I think of the external impacts of going home after your job and you try to find the good in it. So then you're just a little bit more kind, or you're a little bit more happy than, to your point, like most people are just like, I hate my job sucks. Well, that usually bleeds into other areas. Like you're more negative around X, Y, or Z. So yeah, no, I love that. And I think it's probably the fallacy that people believe the ones who love their job love everything about it. And I think as you talked about, that's a fallacy. It's not true. And I think the more we can try to find the few things we like in our job and hang on to those, or if you don't, like you're talking about, just find a new job, make that jump, which is so like meta in this conversation that I really enjoy. That the kind of takeaway is like something you've been preaching throughout this last 10 minutes of like, just say yes. Or if you're not obsessed about it or it isn't giving you energy, like go find something new. Like, why are you going to live? That makes so much sense, because that would be a regret potentially of like, maybe I had a job out there that I could have been more obsessed about. But
yeah, and I declined it because I would have gotten a 30% haircut. Obviously, there's a lot of people that maybe cannot afford a 30% haircut, but if you can, and I would say most people in tech that might be listening to this, they clearly can, then things are going to work out. At least they did for me, and despite I got a massive pay cut. But it was also like there's things beyond like what you make that are relevant. Like I eventually found my wife. I had time to spend with friends. I did something that I really enjoy and like to obsess about. And, maybe it bought me a few extra years of life that it's worth more than the 30%.
Yeah, that's well said. Like no one cares at the end how much money they accumulated. And yeah, no, that makes so much sense. And I think I enjoy that you touched on some people's ways in which they live, or just their kind of place in economic, like it's hard for them to do that. But I think you're right that most of us have the ability. And honestly, I think it brings back a sense of locus of control, agency, that I'm able to kind of try to find something versus just like every day clocking into a job I hate and I can't control, like finding, I don't think many people will regret leaving a job they hate to find a job that they don't hate as much, rather than like you may not find that perfect one, which I always try to tell people that, because the people that are telling you to follow their passion usually made money in oil, all these other businesses. So it's interesting, because I do think obsession is a better thing. And I like that you use that word, because like I'm obsessed about marketing. It's why I do this podcast. I'm obsessed about a lot of things. So it's like, how do you find a job that balances that? There's going to be things you hate, but like at least waking up obsessed, or I love that. Awesome. Well, this was a great conversation. Davide, I have no more questions for you. I think you really helped me open up my eyes around growth, around the understanding of how growth, marketing, sales, all of go-to-market, all of this kind of plays together. And I really enjoyed your approach to life of trying to minimize regrets, but just say yes more and quote unquote live life rather than just living in the comfort zone. So I really appreciate the time and the wisdom you shared today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, of course. And this is the end of the podcast. What one idea or topic of conversation stood out to you today? Write it down, share it with a friend, post it on social. The main thing is take action. That's how we go from theory to mastery. We need to practice. We need to put it into practice. Thank you for listening and being here, and I hope you tune in next week.